Danny was the AD carry player for Evil Geniuses LCS team for the last 3 splits, winning the middle split, the spring split of 2022. But shockingly, he stood down from competitive play after Evil Geniuses beat Team Liquid 3-2 in the lower bracket of the summer split last year, qualifying them for Worlds, and did not, though, go on to play in the next lower bracket match, which ended up being EG's elimination from that particular playoff run. He has not played a competitive game for Evil Geniuses since standing down. That was on the 4th of September last year. Evil Geniuses used the player Cowrie in that position instead to play in the next playoff matches at Chicago and in the playoffs, etc., and at Worlds. Now they have FBI as their AD carry, who was a championship player with 100 Thieves previously. And seemingly, Danny has just disappeared. You barely hear anything about him. He was vaguely referenced, quite frankly, just to hype up someday joining the team, believe it or not. That's one of the last times you'll have seen him mentioned. So what happened was the CEO, Nicole LaPointe Jameson, said, as the LCS free agency season continues, you're going to see a couple more additions to our 2023 roster that we are super excited about. Then just in the second one, you get the reference to Danny. One of these changes is related to our ADC role, which rightfully raises questions around the status of Danny. Spoiler, they don't give you any. They just tell you, while he won't be competing with us this split, I'm happy to say he is still an Evil Genius and we will continue to support him. Then the third tweet, that's all you get on Danny, by the way. I can't spill anything else, but I hope EG fans are ready for next year because something crazy is incoming. Any guesses? By the way, if you can't guess that, you just don't know who Someday the player is or anything about LCS, so I don't even know what the relevance would be. It's not even a clever reveal, is it? You've just said, essentially, Someday's joining. Can you guess who it is? Is it Someday? Like, yeah, it's obvious. So all they did there is ensure you that, like, you know, don't worry. Remember, this is November 23rd. Don't worry. He's still an Evil Genius. That's it. And they even almost imply, because they put there, while he won't be starting with us this split, it's almost implied like he might come back in the future, or November 23rd, maybe he's available for someone else to get, right? Interesting. So that's basically probably the last you've ever heard about the Danny situation. Now, when he stood down, there was a minor scandal already, not just because, what the hell, one of the players who's a champion that very year, 2022, is stepping down. Someone who's had pentakills in the LCS, obviously, yes, in part thanks to the Champions area, etc. Someone who's being hyped by their team, being called the Prince of Pentakills. The idea that person just stands down after qualifying for Worlds, the main goal for a lot of Western players in League of Legends, and without even attempting to go back-to-back and defend the championship that he won in the spring split, that already should raise tons of questions that we've never had answers to. And in this particular case, it's not just that he stood down and didn't play, it invoked an emergency sub rule, which didn't exist in the rules. Go watch my video about it, where EG just got to get, even though they had a player who now it appears behind the scenes was having some sort of breakdown, and even in terms of physical health was suffering difficult and trying circumstances, quite unhealthy circumstances. In all this context, they got a better player who fit the meta better, even played better, I'd argue, at that point in time. Danny was having problems towards the end of the split, and especially in some of the playoff games, he looked a bit like he was done, quite frankly, like he couldn't play top-level league, and he couldn't play the current champion pool. So when this all happened, the obvious question to me was, why didn't they register an ADC sub? Why are they having 2 jungle subs? They had one of their coaches, that Turtle guy, registered as a sub, so they had all, jungle subs. Then they got this emergency sub, and it did, quite frankly, give them a chance to potentially have beaten 100 Thieves. They didn't, but at least they had a chance to do it, and they did go to Worlds, and Cowrie was even half decent there, quite frankly. So we'll come back to that later, though, in the light of the new context I'm going to reveal here, because it shines a little bit of a different light upon that, doesn't it? So then you will have seen in the off-season, you had this weird move about Danny. A whole bunch of the coaching staff left the org. Some of them now are in different orgs, some of them even in Europe. Then you had this situation where on Caedrel's stream, Danny's sister, it's purported, made this set of DMs that Caedrel read out on his stream. Now, interestingly enough, you will notice none of the official people ever just say, this is not Danny's sister, it's not Danny's family, this is all a lie. They did in a vague way try to imply that we'll get to a little bit later. So what happened was, Jacqueline, who was purported to be Danny's sister, sent this message that said, yeah, EG isn't all love and family as they make it seem. Our mom is actually talking with someone from the Players Association, but I don't think anything will happen since Danny doesn't want to make a big deal about anything. He just wants to keep things quiet. Yeah, it's a big sign for Impact to not re-sign with EG. Things are just so bad there. Yeah, a lot of people have the wrong narrative, but at this point, it's too late to change it. EG has been keeping everyone quiet. Ooh, interesting phrasing. We'll come back to that, don't worry. For example, Danny had a laning coach, and the coach got fired for standing up for Danny and going to the Players Association for him. That's how fucked up EG is. Yes, we tell him all the time that he has many fans still love watching him play and support him, but the damage has already been done by EG, and if anything, he'll try streaming on Twitch to see if he would like to do that instead, but in the meantime, he's just enjoying life and getting healthy. Ooh, interesting detail there, by the way, getting healthy. What a weird statement, because remember, EG's one of those orgs, like a lot of the LCS orgs, that brag and flex how they have people like GamerDoc, who comes from, like, I think, like some sort of physiotherapy background or something, and they've got all the, like, support staff and everything, and they keep you on the cutting edge of being a pro and having professionalism, having efficiency in your job and not burn you out. They're one of those ones that love to flex all that. They even call themselves your family, as you'll no doubt find out many, many times in this particular video. So what happened was, that already made people at a minimum curious, and quite frankly, I think it made some people alarmed, and it certainly rose alarm bells with me, and I just decided, since I investigated in a video about their CSGO team, since I already went deep on that team, because it was so dysfunctional across the board, people who were there still, people who'd joined after some of these corrupt people who'd left already, everyone across the board was just telling me all these terrible stories from inside Evil Geniuses on the CSGO side, and on the League of Legends side already, they're the ones that had blacklisted me from having their staff and players on my show. So already that was like, what's going on here? Because I've never had any beef with Evil Geniuses. I don't even know the Nicole LaPointe Jameson person. I had one interaction with her on Twitter. I didn't know anything about the GamerDoc person at the time. And the other people in EG, I thought I actually got along with fairly well. I've had some on shows. In fact, there were people who are often regular guests somehow from the coaching staff. So that whole thing already made me like, I'm going to look into this. Like, what's going on with this org? I found loads on the CSGO side. Spoiler, I'll just give you a quick summary if you didn't watch that video. Massive incompetence across the board. Executives who probably shouldn't have those jobs and got promoted or given those jobs with no relevant experience and no actual track record of doing what they're doing. So don't seem to even be eligible for any of the W's. They steal credit from lower down people in the org and just basically take their ideas and go to their boss and then get promoted from their boss, while that person eventually just gets let go or doesn't even get to move up in the org. Like the top execs make decisions, they're bad decisions, and then when they either don't delegate and make the bad decisions, it fucks the team up, or they would delegate, but to their little underlings who've gotten up by licking their bum, as it were, metaphorically, and so they themselves make bad decisions. And so even the good hires, I've heard the competent people are just inhibited in that org, and then they get the credit stolen from the things they do well. When there's someone to be fired, they get fired, and even the way, by the way, that they fire you is shady as fuck. We'll come back to that later. And there's also a massive common thread throughout the org, it appears, of them promising you the world in terms of money, support, in CSGO, like buyouts, all this stuff. When you join the org, you don't get it, and then at the end you still get treated as though you were given the world and you just failed and you're the one who carries the can. And if you succeed, it was the higher ups, it was the execs, it was Nicole, it was GamerDoc. They're the people who actually succeeded, not you. And they take credit for the systems and the approach and all this talent pie, all this jazz that there doesn't even exist and they had nothing to do with. So I've looked into it, I've gotten the key sources, I've run them all down, I've cross-referenced everything, I've taken the most extreme claims and checked how many more people can verify that. I've taken the lighter claims and seen how ubiquitous those were throughout the people I talked to. And so let's get into it. I can tell you, based on these people's testimony, what it appears happened with Danny and has happened since. So let's start with Danny himself, because a key theme that we have to hit in this video to start to unravel and explain the context of what was going on with Danny is who Danny is and what his situation is. And this is actually quite a tricky thing to talk about, because I don't want to disclose potentially like a medical condition or situation someone has if they themselves haven't felt comfortable to disclose it, or maybe there never has been an official diagnosis in any context like that. So I also think it would be inappropriate. Certainly, you can speculate if you feel like that is something you want to do. I will just say I speculate, or rather give you information based on what the people around Danny told me. So what essentially I was told, the way I would I was just straight up told he has this condition or he is this, but I know a little bit about that world myself. So I'll just say, I would describe it as, it sounds to me like Danny has, let's say, a type of learning difficulty, or he has communication issues, or he perceives the world in a unique enough way from the people around him that they might not perceive a similar set of circumstances. Like, for example, is he enjoying himself? Does he actually think this, what's going on is fine? Is he actually cool with this decision that's been made? Is this what he would want? What's making it sounds like that there was a contrast, quite a harsh contrast between those two positions, what he was thinking and feeling and what some of the people around him were thinking and feeling. That's why it's key in this story of like, well, were people informed that there was problems, or when did they hear, or what did they do? What was their attitude when they heard there might be issues, and how did they respond? Because I don't blame anyone for having their mind work a different way. I'm talking, by the way, not just about Danny, I'm talking about the others in EG. I don't blame them for not being able to necessarily understand, what does this mean? This person, when he communicates, is not the same as when some of the other people communicate with me, or he might actually have a background in a set of circumstances, particularly mentally and family-wise, that I'm not used to dealing with, so I need to like reset that. Yeah, I get that could be really difficult and trying, and it's certainly not, by the way, that I think EG did nothing and they were purely heartless, but you'll find out as we go on, this situation just gets more and more disturbing and ominous and dark as you go on through. So I've heard these problems he had surrounding him led to him not wanting to play professional League of Legends anymore, and in this case, for Evil Geniuses. So the issue goes like this. How long has this been the case, and how long was he exhibiting symptoms of, let's say, some sort of problems or deterioration or mental or physical breakdown? And how long have people known about this, and how long have people been warning and saying something must be done about it, right? First and foremost, if you go across all the accounts, at a minimum, I mean, obviously, literally, this logistically have to be the case. At a minimum, it was prior to the Team Liquid series that it was completely, explicitly stated, like, I can't play anymore. I don't want to even play this series anymore. Literally, I don't even want to play against Team Liquid, who, by the way, he did play in that last series and win the series 3-2 when they went to Worlds. The claim I've heard is that he just straight up, at a minimum, he did not want to play that series. But I've also heard claims that go back the previous series, the series before that, the beginning of the playoffs, the end of the last split, maybe the whole part of the last split. Maybe people knew he had bigger issues, but wasn't having the same manifestation of direct problems, going all the way back to the whole time he's been in EG. So the premise goes like this. At a minimum, before the Team Liquid series, he didn't want to play, but he was convinced to, or it was even phrased like he was coerced to. Now, again, when we're talking about people who might not have the same understanding and ability to communicate that you or I may, or other people do, and that doesn't mean they don't have like the ability. It means that they don't have it in exactly the way we do. So their strengths and weaknesses will maybe be a bit off and misaligned with what we would expect for someone of a certain intelligence, age, social background, level of competency, a job, highly paid, blah, 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 all that jazz. Yeah, it's certainly the case in this situation that the question to me becomes, what do you do when someone like that says they don't want to play? Do you just say to them, right, look, you know, you're under contract, we need you to play. That's the point. When you say coerced, how far did coercion go? Was it just, look, we'd really love it if you could just play this last game? It's implied to me it was more like they just found a way to get him to play. And don't worry, that's not the only juice. We're going to keep going. I'm going to keep dropping it every few sentences, so let's keep going. So then I've also heard it said about other series in the playoff, like the TSM series before that, possibly even the upper bracket series against Cloud9. I've even heard possibly before playoffs, this was certain people's testimony, I've heard that maybe even after the last game of the regular split where they played Cloud9 and they won, but Evil Geniuses hadn't been in the greatest form towards the end of the split. They look a little bit dodgy, but they got this big win over Cloud9. I've heard even after that, because even though they won, he didn't play that great in the game. And a key thing about Danny that was stressed to me by many people is he's someone who gets really down on himself if he thinks he played badly, even if you win, because he has this sense of an obligation towards his teammates and how he himself should perform. It's why actually I heard that latter part about the idea he has an obligation towards his team. I've heard that's the whole reason he even played these playoff matches, and that if he was having problems at the end of the split throughout the whole playoffs, the main reason they were able to coerce him to play is because there was that underlying thread that everyone knew that he really feels like he needs to play for his teammates. He doesn't want to let them down, as it were. So I hear that was played upon by the Evil Geniuses management, some of these exec figures that came in and they just used that information to their advantage. I've also heard a version, by the way, that it wasn't even just like, I'll play. I've heard it was even maybe at one point said, like, essentially, like, I just want to lose the game. Like, let's just get the season over. Like, I don't want to play anymore. I've heard that's like the level of, like, sort of warning signs that were being heard within the org. And they still went ahead. He still played this last game. He qualified them to Worlds. And are you ready? If that's not enough, I've heard from someone else that they were maybe not even planning on telling his teammates he wasn't going to play. but that it was leaked to his teammates anyway by someone else, and that the Evil Geniuses management was not happy about the fact that his teammates got to find out, like, oh, by the way, he probably won't play after this series. Like, they didn't like that at all, and this is one of the reasons I suspect why, because it was also intimated to me that Evil Geniuses management had even considered actually trying to strong-arm him, coerce him into playing the rest of the playoffs, like 100 Thieves, potentially the final against C9 if they'd have made it in Chicago, that it wasn't even the case that he just got this period off. Maybe they got him to play this game, and then they figure out another way to get him to play the next game and then see if he can keep going. I've even heard that was really on the table. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because it isn't as simple as just being like, right, something happened, they reacted badly initially, it was all confusion, and then, I wish we just handled it differently. No, you'll see, like, there were many people who knew about these things within the org. It happened a bunch of different occasions, and the question is, what action was taken and why were those actions taken, quite frankly? So then he went home after he'd finished playing for Evil Geniuses. E.G. went off and played Worlds. I've heard he went home, had medical health checks in which he was found to be massively underweight and had serious medical issues related to his time and experience on Evil Geniuses. Now, that isn't just you felt bad or, mentally I'm not in the right place to play. That might all be the case as well. In this case, though, it's physically affected you. You've physically lost weight. That implies, by the way, maybe you can't eat, you don't want to eat, you're depressed, or something's really bothering you. There's a million angles that could be. But that's really disturbing. I've almost never heard of that happening, except it's a really extreme case I've heard of in like China and Korea and something like that. Oftentimes, many years ago, with more disreputable orgs. Evil Genius is supposed to be one of the greatest orgs of all time in Western esports, quite frankly. I have heard that he just straight up would have retired as a result of this in the off-season. But the EG management was somehow pressuring him to stay. Again, it was implied to me, maybe they were coercing him with sort of unethical means. Notice I didn't say illegal there. I said unethical. Because I want people to make a key distinction that people don't do in the modern day. Just because something is legal or you're not being taken to court for it does not mean it was right and it was a moral action. The difference between the law and morality is enormous. And in cases like this, I think it's actually key. It is the key distinction we need to make here. Because EG doesn't just say, we didn't do anything illegal, we kept everything. No, they pretend like we're his family, we really care about him. We put the health of our players first. Wow, like it's really important to us, like to look at, they do all that shit. So they're not going, we just go to the letter of the law. They're implying they do above and beyond. They're making themselves sound like heroes. They're literally describing themselves as this person's family and he's part of their family. Well, that does come with a different set of expectations. And that comes certainly with a set of judgments that can be made about you, which for another employer might not be that big a deal. Yeah, you can't work, you don't get paid. Could be like that. But in this scenario, you haven't built yourself as that. And that's the key point that I want to make here. Because basically, I've heard, and by the way, you might think, wow, they want to keep... No, one, to let this story die down, not have the same drama. That's why in the off-season she's doing that interesting tweet set, isn't she? The Nicole LaPointe Jameson person. Then also, I've heard it was even speculated that maybe the reason why they wanted to stay on the off-season was so they could sell him, which is really alarming, by the way, because are you really going to sell this guy and then tell all his future teams, oh, by the way, he's medically underweight, he's all these problems that we've heard about. Like, no, you're probably not, are you? It was implied to me that they were going to try and sell him as some sort of like, just bait, basically. Like, the idea is, it's like that analogy of the used car salesman who sells you the dodgy car, but he just makes sure it's got just enough petrol, it can run just enough, it can get 10 miles down the road, that when it then breaks down, well, it's too late for you, you can't go back to him, he'll go, well, it worked when it came off the lot. Like, that's what it sounds like, which also sounds like you're just using this player as a very, like, ruthlessly and cynically as a commodity, and that you don't care about his health, and even worse, you're going to potentially trick another org into signing him so you benefit, and on top of that, you're then going to, like, they might not be able to use him. And then presumably when he has problems in that team, if he does, you then would just claim like, oh, but he seemed all right when he was at EG. It was just that thing at the end, wasn't there? So I don't know. This whole thing just sits so badly with me based on the stories I'm hearing. And here's the key thing. I heard from so many people, and some of these people, I'm telling you straight up, they're not people who are malicious. They're not people I think would lie. Like, these are people where the stories corroborated. Oh, there's some of this was really disturbing when I was hearing this. So then, how about this? I also heard that it's actually the opinion of people who were in EG that this didn't have to happen. Like, if he'd just been handled differently in the playoffs, they think he could have just stayed and been a legit player. There wouldn't be any of these issues. And quite frankly, it was told to me that EG management did actually directly ignore previous warnings from on-site staff about his health and his condition. And that is a very, very key distinction we need to make. It's not that they didn't know or they didn't get the right info, they got it in the wrong way. They just ignored it. They were told time and time again by multiple different people at different levels of the org. They ignored it, or they came up with game plans which, quite frankly, just seemed like they were to protect Evil Geniuses playoff spot, Evil Geniuses world spot, Evil Geniuses the org. Not Danny the player. It sounds like his condition was essentially the least important, beyond can he get into a server, start pressing buttons, and we can play an official match. So beyond Nicole LaPointe Jameson, two of the key people in the org are the gamer doc, Lindsay something or other, who was somebody who previously, she's like the senior director of performance, which sounds like she's like a sports psychologist. No, as far as I've heard, she comes from like the world of doing massages and physio, and she was in EG doing this, but then she just kissed the right arses or said the right things. Don't worry, I'll have a whole video come about this fucking moron from CSGO soon. And basically somehow got promoted to like a top job, became like one of the like right-hand women, as it were, in this case, of the Nicole person. And then they're just some little fucking brain trust making mad decisions across the board. And I've already heard, again, I'll go into a separate video, she directly in League of Legends and CSGO has fucked things up for some of the teams and like messed with how they practice and some of the decisions that are being made and done mad inappropriate things in the context that you are somebody who gives fucking massages and now you're suddenly everyone's boss and thinking you're a genius who knows about the game. So basically, I've heard, beyond Nicole, who apparently everything goes through her, like I've heard basically nothing happens without her say so. But beyond her, you have the gamer doc individual, senior director of performance, at least now, and then you had the general manager, who I think was the guy called Andrew Barton, or maybe it was the Greg Kim guy. I know there was two guys within this org. I know the Andrew Barton guy was a key figure as well, though. Basically, the GM, as far as I know, is actually a main complaint in CSGO, works in multiple games, including League of Legends. Now, I've heard it's either the GamerDoc person or Nicole herself that are the people who would have had the power to grant like a break for Danny. To say, okay, you can stop playing, or let's get the sub in, or right, that's fine. Oh, he's having problems, right, sub him out then. I've heard they're the ones, and quite frankly, as I just alluded to, I've heard nothing really goes on in EG without Nicole say so. Like, she's ultimately the one who has the executive decision, as it were. And then I've also just heard across all games, but League of Legends especially, that they do the classic lie in EG where they tell you when you're coaching stuff that's coming on board, oh, don't worry, you'll have all the keys, you have control, you have say over the roster and what they do with it and how the practice work. And then it's just a lie. Like, they just make all the decisions, basically, all the key ones, but you get blamed for them, even though they'll also take credit within the org for it being a family and a system. And like I said before, so I've heard straight up that the Danny situation, that he was having problems mentally and potentially physically, was mentioned a number of times across this particular split. In terms of coaching meetings, performance meetings, I've heard that, so the gamer doc and Andrew would be there in these meetings. I've heard that it was being made clear he's having problems, there's warnings going on here. And that, first of all, the primary concern seemed to be how you protect Evil Geniuses, the org, from this, not like help Danny or what to do. And no action was taken to actually help Danny in this particular sense. I've heard from some people that they think the Andrew Barton guy was actually a legit guy and seemed like he cared, but that he was either overruled or he just didn't have the power to say this guy can have a break or do more than he did. I've heard there was even a coach or some management figure within Evil Geniuses that was trying to like turn people against Danny, and that this character had done it to a previous player, and that young player in the team. And that, so as a result, by the way, already I've heard, because of Danny's behaviour and his personality, temperament, let's say, some players already didn't fuck with him, as we'll get to later. But this certainly doesn't help. You have someone within the org, like, actively working against you. I've heard there were some things that did get people concerned. Like, I've heard that there were staff who saw like the way he would use socials and did recommend like maybe his family need to be involved. Maybe we need to get them in here. I've heard that Evil Geniuses did fly out his family a couple of times. I think once during the regular split, once during the playoff split, maybe after the TSM series. So, okay, sounds like some people within the org were doing some things. I've also heard on occasion when he was having problems, he would get an extra day off here and there to potentially not have to scream and to do a mental reset and to rest, etc. So there were some actions taken, but it's just that they didn't take the primary action to just remove this guy from the game of League of Legends, or basically make an ultimatum like, you've got to get some serious help here. Because if you read the message about him stepping down, if you consider some things I've said before, maybe they were trying to make him play in Chicago, maybe they actually were tricking his teammates where he's still playing and not telling him he's going to step down. Maybe he had multiple times he has to step down. If you know all that, all of a sudden it becomes gross when you read the message about him stepping down, doesn't it? So Nicole LaPointe Jameson says, with love regarding our league roster for Chicago, thank you for understanding and sending nothing but amazing vibes for the forever Prince of Pentakills. Right, we'll just read this. It says, with much respect and an open heart, I share with you today that our beloved Kyle Danny Sakamaki will not be competing at this weekend's LCS Summer Split Finals in Chicago. It takes a great deal of courage and self-awareness to recognise when the right time is to step away from something you've worked so hard at achieving. Yeah, it's almost like you shouldn't be coerced in that decision, isn't it? Especially when you care so deeply for this organisation and your teammates in order to focus on your mental health. Now, imagine if they had have coerced this guy and they are even like putting in the programme in there, like, especially when you care, you know, you'd want to play, wouldn't you? You care so deeply about Evil Geniuses and especially your teammates, don't you? You wouldn't want to let them down. But now that you qualify for Worlds, you know, it's key that you know now's when you could, you know what I mean? Like, even though this phrase just seems so fucking gross when you hear some of the things I've heard. Kyle has played an integral part in EG's success this year in LCS, and there are not enough words to express his undisputable value to this team and organisation. We at Evil Geniuses are more than just an organisation. Oh, are you ready? We're a family. How fucking dare you? Just wait till you find out more about the EG org in this video and what a family they're like, by the way. We battle together, win together, lose together, and support each other through every situation. Coerce each other together, conceal information from each other together, ignore warnings together, make fucked up decisions that are cynical about people's lives and use them as commodities together. And we're kind of like a family. What? Yo, technically you are. You're just, in this scenario, really fucked up family who don't actually seem to love the children in the family and just use them cynically and even replace them and use them as trade. Oh, fucking hell. And this guy has a real family who was going through it with him and you're making it like you're his family. Come on. So, okay, let's just keep going and read this putrid tripe out, shall we? So then she goes, Kyle is a part of this family. We will continue to support him in every way possible as he takes his time away. Right? It was implied to me after this that they potentially like tried to get him to stay and they were maybe going to trade him and they were maybe even going to force him to play the matches like just before this was made as a statement. Like, come on, man. Are you ready? And then here's the key phrasing, because remember, he's never played again. They go, we will continue to support him in every way possible as he takes time away and doesn't quit, takes time away. I've heard he just wants to strip up quit League of Legends. And we look forward to welcoming him back when he's ready. So you also soft sell people. The idea this is just temporary, like he's just going away now. You know, it's even implied by the way it's written. Like maybe it's just the playoffs he misses. They've qualified for Worlds. Maybe you see him at Worlds. They don't say anything here about he won't be at Worlds, something like that. You'd never read from this that you're never going to see this guy play ever again, would you? This was done on September the 6th. September the 4th was when the Team Liquid Game 5 took place, which was the last game he ever played for EG. To fans of the LCS community, we ask that you show Kyle nothing but unwavering support and the empathy he deserves from all of us. Yeah, he did deserve empathy from all of you, didn't he? Did he give it to him? I've heard some of you didn't, including the person writing this message. And then, because this community is more than just fandom and rivalries, or trash talk and banter, it's about the love of this esport. Together, we can be a positive force that is understanding and supportive. We encourage you to remember that players are humans too. Well, fucking hell. If someone told me a human was having a breakdown and I saw they were even having physical consequences, I'd probably just say, right, get about the bloody little children's video game then. I don't think that's the most important thing they could be doing with their life right now when you consider the extreme fucking consequences of when people have, like, let's say, mental distress and are forced to do something that involves a high amount of pressure, potentially, not entirely, with their own, let's say, full consent or maybe coerced to undertake that behaviour when they don't feel fully comfortable. Yeah, that would be very disturbing to me. And then they go, and that they dedicate their lives to this game with the weight of the world on their shoulders for our entertainment. So essentially, if it's true that anyone in EG did coerce this guy or tricked him or made him play more matches than they should, then they knew. They're admitting it here. They're even just pissing in your face and going, they dedicate their lives to this game with the weight of the world on their shoulders. Well, in that case, why didn't you just let the person have the games off? Why didn't you just say, this is too important? Like, we can't just let this person, and for our entertainment. So you acknowledge it's just children's entertainment at the end of the day. Like, it's not actually some really important thing. Like, he wasn't a guy who was like, look, Daddy, you're the last firefighter on this beat, mate. We got to have someone else running the building to save this person. Like, no, it was just children's video games for our entertainment. And yes, EG wouldn't be as good, but they could still potentially win the children's video game without this guy having to be tormented mentally. Yeah, we can acknowledge that and lose weight physically. Yeah, we can all acknowledge that, right? Since he's a human and we're all these compassionate, empathetic people, right? We can all surely acknowledge that much. I've heard, by the way, that that message upset a bunch of people in this org, and a bunch of people in the Danny camp are not happy about the way this was framed publicly, as well as what was done behind the scenes and what the actual consequences mentally and physically for him have been in his life. I've even heard there were people from EG that have tried to whistleblow, you've heard the implication also about his family, and go through the official channels, that it just doesn't work, and that also Danny himself just someone who doesn't like the press and the attention. He's the sort of guy who it seems like he's past it and he wants to just move on with his life. But unfortunately, that means the scumbags are sort of getting away with it at the moment. Well, sort of, right? Maybe the odd person will get something. Maybe a news article will come out with a bunch of stuff. I would be interested, wouldn't it? Yeah. Like one of the greatest journalists that, well, maybe I've said too much already, eh? So something's coming. Any guesses, guys? Any guesses? So let's get into this. Let's talk about Danny himself, because again, this is the key context you need to understand. I was told he was a bit weird in real life, as it were, which just essentially means he was a bit socially misattuned, that he would isolate himself, he would sit apart from people if people were sitting in a group talking, etc. Obviously, he had that weird tweet he did, like, a day after they lost to TL, where he said something like, when all is said and done, you'll see, and then like a heart symbol or whatever, which is a bit like ominous. Like, what? What's going on? I thought you just didn't feel like you could play me. Almost implying like it's all going to come out one day and you'll see what's going on. Quite frankly, I've heard his comms were good. Like, he would comm in the game. He wasn't like a silent person in case you think that's going along with whatever his situation is. But I have heard that there were a bunch of times where when they would finish scrims, he would just disappear and go home alone. Like, he wouldn't stay, fraternize, talk to people, like play extra game, play fun. He would just leave and go straight home, say nothing now on. I've also heard, as I alluded to earlier, if he played badly, he would be miserable, even if the team won the game. I mean, quite frankly, that's one of the things about, if you remember, what he looked like when they lost. Do you remember that? When he lost, it went like this. Look, that's what he looked like after they won. That was when they won Game 5 against Team Liquid to qualify his team to Worlds. Does this look like someone who was happy playing that game? Does this look like someone who's won the game? That looks like the player who lost the Worlds game. That looks like a Team Liquid player. That doesn't look like someone who just won essentially the biggest match of his life to get his team to Worlds. And if in this scenario, I was supposed to believe he could still potentially have played there and had a crack at win the World Championship. This is what he looked like. And by the way, if you play this video from this moment on, I'll link it in the description box below. He's just crying completely more than this. Like, what happens was when he won, he initially had like an awkward smile while the rest all jump up and celebrate. He seems a bit off. They come up and do like a stand together, like take photos or a picture. They go back and he starts crying like this. Like, there's so many warning signs involved with this whole situation. There's so many moments you just think, what's going on? Like this just isn't the way you'd expect people to react. So then I've heard he was just straight up having panic attacks from the stress of this situation of playing for EG, that he didn't know how to interact with people, and that caused some of his teammates to not like him, by the way, which is increasing the feeling that you're in a hostile environment. And they just didn't, some of them just couldn't understand his emotional temperament and who he is and how he behaved. They just couldn't get it. I've heard past teammates in previous lineups wanted him out and told the EG staff, like, we want to get rid of this guy, like, just replace him, he's got problems. I've even heard during 2022, when they found out he had some of these issues, or they manifested a bit more extremely, that there's players who thought, like, right, let's just get rid of him for playoffs then. Like, maybe we don't even use him in the summer playoffs. Like, can we just replace him now? Can we get a sub? Can we do it? I've heard that these were conversations happening. These were thoughts that people were having within the team. And then I've heard, like I said earlier, that since there were people who thought maybe he just needs to be replaced entirely, that when it was like later on, they found out like, oh, wait, we're getting tricked and he's not even going to play after this. That's it. I heard people weren't happy with that at all. And that their whole thing was like, what the hell? We could have just done this at the beginning already. Which suggests, by the way, his teammates knew about these issues as well. It's not that they all can just go, well, we heard it from a few staff in meeting. No, this implies people just knew. So the question then becomes, how long did people know? Right? I've heard that there is a past manager, coach figure that came with Danny, potentially from like a past team or something, and that basically this guy knew who he was before even Evil Geniuses. And I've heard that the way it was described within Evil Geniuses, and if this is the case, this is so inappropriate, was that they would just sort of say, well, he is just insert this type of a person. That's just how they are. He's not burned out. He's just strange. He just behaves in this way. I've heard that was the messaging given to other players and people within the org. And by the way, the reason why that is outrageous is because who the fuck is that guy to diagnose Danny? Who is that guy to then tell other people his own fabricated, apparently, diagnosis of Danny? And then who is him and the rest of the EG management to make decisions based on just some fucking guy's diagnosis of someone without ever actually having like an actual doctor diagnose what's going on with this guy? Now, I will say, I have heard Danny himself, goes in line with how you've heard him described. I've heard he himself didn't want to speak to sports psychologists, which could have been an issue with this particular case. But the point is, when someone's having mental and physical problems, eventually you don't just let them decide what happens. Like, if you're in the team, you have to be responsible and treat them like you care about them and that you're part of their family and all the rest of it. Even just in the workplace, they're going to be inefficient at their job, aren't they, if you just let them continue this way? So eventually, it doesn't matter whether they keep saying, nah, I'm fine. Eventually you step in, you make an ultimatum, you take action, don't you? So that's one of my problems with this whole scenario, because it's possible this was known his entire time in Evil Geniuses. It's just that the bigger problems and the breakdowns came in the summer. So I've heard, quite frankly, like, if you look at the way it was in EG, remember, he didn't come from the academy team. People always make that mistake. He came from the amateur team. Evil Geniuses had Evil Geniuses LCS, Academy, and then they had an amateur team called EG Prodigies that Danny came up on. So he was the guy who came straight from the amateur team to the LCS team, and then, yes, they integrated him in that very interesting way in 2021. He didn't come from the academy team. He's actually someone that was just thrust not only into the LCS, but then suddenly he's winning the split, and he's going to MSI, and he's playing Faker and Caps, and the pressure on this guy was enormous. Again, it's not like it's a normal player who's been playing years and years and years and years. And remember, EG, their coaching staff, they're all have been flexing about these guys being the god rookies, him and fucking Jojo the whole time. Think of the pressure you've helped to put on this guy's back as well. And he's always been apparently an unusual guy. Even if you look at his playing style, it matches some of that. Like, by the way, he didn't just play stuff like Seraphine because he couldn't play like the other meta champions. That's also his preferred playing style. Apparently he likes like weird, like mage and off meta bot picks. And that's just his style of play. He's a different type of a guy. He doesn't necessarily want to be like the super hard carry guy on those champions. And by the way, I said about it earlier, so I'll bring it back now. If this was known about before playoffs, or at the beginning of playoffs, or during the whole split, or he was having symptoms earlier, then this puts a whole new light on that emergency sub situation for Evil Geniuses. Because wait a minute, why didn't you register an ADC sub for the playoffs, knowing that this situation was unraveling behind the scenes, that it was starting to become a problem, there was warning signs being seen, you're getting told by coaching staff, you're hearing from other teammates, you don't want to play with them, maybe we should why wasn't there an emergency ADC sub registered? Why was this coach guy who's a fucking jungler still registered as a sub? Exactly. Why wait so long? Because it only makes sense, the emergency sub, if you really did write at, like, let's say a minimum before the TSM series, if not the TL one, you just like literally you cannot play under any circumstances, and like we just got to have someone now, and obviously a jungle can't play ADC. No, it was presented like that, but it doesn't seem like it was. And that makes it seem, quite frankly, like Riot themselves, the LCS, made a corrupt decision, which was something I wondered about and speculated about in that video. It seems like they had no business making this decision, and it wasn't a good faith decision because the information wasn't given to them seemingly in good faith. More was known, even though they pretended like this just came out of nowhere. No one could understand. Hence, emergency. Because that's not the way the sub rules work. You don't even have to make your emergency subs, by the way, until the playoffs have been set. So even during the whole split, you could have had these issues and then said, right, well, for the playoffs, obviously he's going through something, so let's register a sub just in case anyway. And by the way, the Cowrie guy was already in their academy team, as far as I know, who is the person in it. So they even could have done it. They just chose not to. They chose, and this is a key detail to note, they chose not to register Cowrie as one of their subs for the playoffs. So that also implies, by the way, think about what I said earlier. Remember how I said it was implied to me by someone within EG that maybe they weren't even just going to let him have the game against TL off, qualify to Worlds, and then let him play that rather, qualify to Worlds and have the rest of the time off. Maybe they were going to try and make him play in Chicago. Well, if you don't have an emergency sub, he's going to have to play, right? That's essentially what they were able to put before Riot's feet, it seems like. So already in itself, that in itself seems so dirty. Now, the key thing, this is a little piece of juice for you that you might not be aware of, is I've heard Danny is still on the payroll. He gets healthcare as a result of this. And that some people in EG want to present this as like, see, we are compassionate, we are caring, but that's not my read, and I'll explain why in a second. My read is, no, this looks like a payoff. This looks like hush money that you give to Danny and his family to make up for what happened and what you maybe did to him or didn't do and didn't give him help. And that because of what's happened, he's experienced actual physical, medical complications and circumstances as a result of what happened during his time on EG, you're paying him off, basically. And this is the way to make sure there isn't a big story comes out about involving his family, that there isn't a massive scandal in an investigation for the Player Association. Spoiler, the Player Association is only going to investigate, did Evil Geniuses do something illegal under like California law or whatever with Danny? And in that scenario, I suspect, like a lot of these investigations, they won't find that. But I suspect, like the TSM one, it's the case that Reginald's a dickhead and that some people in EG were being dickheads and behaving in an inappropriate, incompetent, and I would say, I don't know about malicious, but I would say selfish, unduly cynical manner. And what is disgusting to me is the idea they then presented themselves as the opposite in public for optics. For PR, they hyped themselves as his family, caring people, empathy. They even like demanded the idea all fans had to support him, like no one else could ever criticize him. Oh no, there's more to come, don't worry. So the key thing is this. I have to give you a brief history lesson on this Evil Geniuses to explain why I don't buy that it was a compassionate, empathetic move to give this guy the money and the healthcare still to help him out. Now, in the CSGO video, I only started after Nicole LaPointe Jameson becomes CEO of Evil Geniuses. I read out that hilarious Washington Post POV piece with like nonsense, overly made comments that make no sense whatsoever. I read that whole thing out and it is hilarious, but also very telling about who the company is. But there was more to the story I didn't even know that I had to investigate. And when I found it out, there's no way Evil Geniuses is a sympathetic org, right? Evil Geniuses is owned by a company called Peak Six, which is a fintech firm that focuses, I mean, I don't know a lot about this space, so this is just based on my reading, on like high volume arbitrage trading. And basically, as far as I know, they own like a clearinghouse, which then is involved in then you like sell these stocks, which I think was even behind like the Robin Hood company or something. And basically, Nicole LaPointe Jameson worked for Peak Six years, like something like 4 years or more before she was hired as CEO, and she was on part of the team that decided what would this Peak Six firm do with profit that they made from trading. And this was one of the ideas, was Evil Geniuses esports organization. And the story goes, this part I was mentioning in the other video, that she was hired without an interview, she had zero esports exec experience, she's got this job. She quickly took over massive control of everything, had to say in anything she wanted to. She managed the relationships with the owners, so she was the person who just had, it was just her, EG just became hers entirely, not just because she was the CEO, but in terms of even other people who were in the org and their power and what they could do and their purview. She just gained all the power by managing these relationships. And then she did a lot of dodgy hires, like she hired a bunch of people, it sounds like, from that were just survivors of other orgs that were dying out, like Immortals and Optic and all those ones in the LCS over the years. People who probably shouldn't be in some of these roles. It sounds like they expanded way too fast. I've heard the GamerDoc person came in and the support role, but somehow quickly rose to the top of the org and became like the right-hand woman of the Nicole person, to the extent that eventually this person who was giving you massages before is now renegotiating your contract potentially if you're a player. And I've even heard that the Dota 2 team, which if anyone knows anything about the history of the EG org, was pretty much all they lived and died on for about the last 10 years. It wasn't League and CSGO. Those had brief times where they were very good. It was always Dota 2 was the elite game that had the shot at winning TI all those years. I've heard that when those players were basically told, like, yeah, we're just moving on without you in the EG team, that she's like the person who gets to break it to them. This fucking person was giving you massages before and doesn't have any experience in being an esports exec and barely knows anything about these fucking games. Like, it's outrageous. And this is all coming from the Nicole person's decisions coming down. I've heard that also the style of how they would fire staff, and this is key for the Danny situation, who isn't staff, he's a player, remember? I've heard when they would fire staff in EG, they would fire you using the for cause loophole, which basically implies like if you have like a good reason, you can fire the person. And if you do that, like an example would be like they have a bad attitude, they're toxic to other people, they've said things that are important, they don't turn up on time or to meet, whatever it might be. Essentially, if you can claim that, I've heard they would blame people and say like, we're going to fire this person for cause, when it wasn't necessarily the case. They would badmouth them internally, so people knew internally, like, stay the fuck away from that person, don't say anything, because you don't want to be associated. And, spoiler, this is like the mark of death, like, they're next, they're just going now, so stay away. And, by the way, litigation might be pending. And I've heard basically that they would take that approach so that legally, they didn't have to pay unemployment to these people. And that what would happen is, so it's like the analogy if people know the case, where supposedly car companies would cynically calculate, like someone would say, oh, there's a part in the car that's not functional, sir, and like it's going to cause potentially some sort of problems. And basically what they do is instead of just recalling the car because it's got a faulty part and people might die, they calculate for real what's the like rough estimate of how much we'd have to pay out in compensation to people's families if they had an accident or died. And if that number at the end, that sum, is a smaller amount of money than the total recall of all the cars we sold in that class in that particular time, then it's supposedly, cynically, these companies say, let people die and have accidents then. And they just do, because all they care about is the profit margin, and they just do it. It makes it sound like that, quite frankly. That's what's so disturbing about this. It makes it sound like you just treat people as just a commodity. And then also, I'll add in, that makes me feel like it's not legit. That makes me feel like when this Danny guy gets paid out, gets to stay on the payroll, gets the healthcare, that just sounds like guess what? This guy apparently has physical evidence that he had lost weight, and that and also there's plenty of testimonies that he's had all these mental problems, etc., in the team, and stress and distress and panic attack. If this is all the case, then wouldn't they have like a pretty good case to go against you? Wouldn't they have a pretty scandalous case, not only to make public and to make EG look bad and not at all like a family, but this could even be a legal case, right? You could maybe even sue the people. And I've heard basically when they do deal with staff like that and just fire them with 4 cause, it's only if you litigate against them that they'll just pay you out and make sure it doesn't go to court and it's no problem. Otherwise, that's just the way they do it, and they rely on the idea. You might not have the money and the time and the inclination to do this. You've got to get on and get your job and get next month's rent, right? Now, one of the reasons I despise the way this was all handled is the image that EG's put out the whole time. They were bragging when they were on top about Danny and Jojo and having rookies and not needing big stars. And yet I've heard behind the scenes, they even told some of the management people, some of the coaching staff, essentially, you can't have big stars and you can't have certain imports and you have to work with these rookies. And by the way, if it doesn't work out with these rookies, you might just be fired too. Like, that's the expectation. So it's just nonsense because they try to make it sound like there's this pipeline of talent, right? It's nonsense. As far as I've heard, the pipeline of talent is just putting pressure on the coaches, like make it work without top name talents. And it's nothing to do with EG, the org, as far as I've heard, that they got those talents. I've heard it's that Empire guy, the analyst. I've searched through to find out where this all went to. I've heard the Empire guy is the one who found Danny and Jojo, and he was the one out there scouting them and finding them when they were just nobodies playing on nobody teams. I've heard then him and Peter Don implemented them into the team. It wasn't these top people like Nicole LaPointe Jameson, the fucking gamer doc. These people weren't involved with why you have these great players, etc. Now, why they developed, etc. But sounds like they were involved with some of the fucking breakdown of these players, so doesn't it? Then how about when you had that EG Worlds video where they made Worlds after this whole scandal and bragged about it? So they got to Worlds. You might remember this obnoxious video. Remember, I said in the EG CSGO video, a common trend among all people in like the EG org, past and present, was like, this individual is there for self-aggrandizement, to make themselves look good and take all the credit and basically be the face of the org. Not the players. She's going to be the face of the org, apparently. Now, in that video, they brag about the idea that, like, inferring about Team Liquid, that they would spend 7 million. Yeah, you know what? Here's the thing about Team Liquid buying incredibly expensive players like Bjergsen and Hans Sama. In theory, they're not going to have breakdowns because they played for many years as top pros and been at Worlds, all these competitions. Like, they're people you can sort of rely upon. They've been in that situation many times, and they're going to play out playoffs. Like, what you did is didn't spend money on big names like that, took young players who've never been in this situation before, seemingly applied inappropriate amounts of pressure and coercion tactics, got them to play, then they broke down, then you've sort of like paid them off some hush money and quietly shuffled them out the back door, potentially even with the notion that you might have sold them to someone else and tricked them in the off-season by buying a false bill of goods. Like, I don't know about that. Not really feeling that. Then there's the whole angle where they were like, get on your knees. What, like a player would have to do to beg for time off in Evil Geniuses, even when they're suffering maybe physical and mental concerns from what's going on in their life and how they're being treated, and the fact that their warnings have been ignored over and over and over again, and now it's come to a head and it's gotten really serious. Yeah, suddenly that isn't such fun banter anymore, is it? It doesn't really work as trash talk. I'd almost say if you were the org doing these things or involved with these things or responsible for these things, whether it's your fault or not, you're responsible. I would say just shut the fuck up bragging about it. Don't talk trash on other teams. Just maybe have a quiet one this Worlds, you know. And then also, how about that whole approach you might have seen where the Nicole LaPointe Jameson herself did a Twitter video where she addressed essentially the wake of people asking like, what's going on when those like sister DMs were leaked on the Casual stream. Now that made it seem, quite frankly, even though at the end she says about supporting Danny and his family and the players, even though at the end she says that, quite frankly, when you watch this video, like I get the vibe she's just combating the idea of people saying EG did something wrong, or what's going on, or wow, the players, or this story about the coach that got fired for standing up. I get the idea that's what she thinks she's combating. But the vibe of this video, by the way, is even almost as though like it's not true what the sister said, and they're combating even like the sisters, because that's not I would be very careful on how I phrase that if I made a statement after someone's own family has come out and said like our mum's not happy with it, we're trying to go through like the right means, like Danny can't talk about it. It's definitely not a family. If I had all that happen, I'd explicitly address that. She didn't. She was very careful and vague and made it sound like maybe she's just talking about community perception, but in doing so, by not addressing the family angle or even the idea that whether it's real or not, it is implied like maybe that's being tossed aside and brushed aside too. Because in that message, she was saying about how it was pretty disappointing and shocking. How could that be? You know the case of what was going on behind the scenes. It's just a really big blow personally into the org. Well, imagine what a big blow it must have been to Danny's family and to Danny to be treated this way. Says that the allegations being made are untrue and completely unfounded. Now, as far as I know, I think she is telling the truth in the sense that she's referring to the staff guy being fired for standing up for him. I've heard from the investigation that that's like not true, or the way it was explained is it's been like scoffed the way that what was actually going on in that regard, and that maybe the sister was like crossed wires on that one. But even so, the rest of it, they do make allegations that it's not family vibe, not like it. You've sort of smuggled in by addressing that maybe it's the case that it's not true. You've been able to then also hand wave the rest of it all away, right? And then that whole thing about referencing like having HIPAA violations and legal employment constraints. I've just told you what I've heard EG's like, and that doesn't even seem like it makes any sense. Why would HIPAA? Like, you're not a doctor. You are aware of that, right? Like, nah, this whole thing's nonsense. Like, that's just her, by the way, hiding behind using terminology and words you might not understand or think, oh, it's not legal for me to mention anything more about what's going on. Like, she's just doing that. Then she even says in this actual little video, like, we hire and don't hire based on athletic needs for our players. Well, that's just not the case in terms of Danny, is it? Like, either you should have told him you can't play anymore because you won't speak to sports psychs or whatever it is in that case, or you didn't hire the appropriate people, put the right people around him, listen to warnings and implement the proper strategies, did you? And quite frankly, other players and coaches seem more than aware of that. More than aware of it. And then, and also, by the way, there's a really sinister part here where it sounds like a good thing. She says about how they've brought on third-party counsel in November. Yeah, that makes it sound like, just to check that everything's going. No, that sounds like you fucked up so badly that for legal reasons, you quickly brought in some people to investigate and audit and go like, ooh, who's to blame for this and what was to blame and what went wrong here? Because you know that this is deep shit and this could have blown up massively publicly in the off season. Maybe it could even blow up legally, who knows? And then, so that, by the way, ain't a great sign. If everything was awesome in the org and it was all untrue, why would you need to do that, right? You wouldn't need to. You were there. You make the decisions. You have eyes on the fucking people who are in charge. You make the final call. Why would you need someone to audit whether you did it right or not? And then, in this actual message, again, they had the audacity to call themselves family. Fuck that noise. Because the way the EG behaved towards Danny isn't like how family would, or it's a fucked up family if it is. And then I'll just throw this in there. Another thing is, for this split where Danny still has never played and we're not getting any info, they did a video where it was about the dark truth of Evil Geniuses. I'll put a link in the description box. And then it just references all like silly jokes about like Someday and George. When there is a dark truth lurking behind the scenes that's really sinister about your org, read the fucking room and don't even reference that as a joke. Don't even reference it as a joke. That is so See, their actions show you that they're not the people they pretend to be. They just pretend to be those people for effect. And then I'll just throw this out there quickly, but we'll get back to it and wrap. Evil Geniuses' social media in general is a joke. Like, for example, one of their social media intern people who's fired now attacked me and tried to do that thing where you flex that you're being blocked by me. So then everyone else rushes to say something stupid like what you just said to get blocked by me. So then you can all go, ha, 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 we've all been blocked by this guy. Well, here's the problem. He's just an intern, a stupid idiot on social media. Fair enough, okay. I will say the shit they did with like LS, a lot of those orgs like do that, like low-level industry people join us the social media and then do stuff like, I'll get my own back on LS and Thorin by unfollowing them from the main account. Even though like the main account, like the reason they followed us is like maybe the CEO's like a personal friend of ours, or they've collaborated on loads of content, or we're an industry veteran or legendary figure who knows all the people in the... No, let's just fuck around with that. Because remember, it's always silly beggars on social media. But this is what I found a bit telling to me though, was there was a guy who's called like, there we go. So the intern's the guy at the top, John the Whore. Appropriate name, eh? And this guy down here, E.G. Tyler Kahar, says, there's value in me being able to see his nonsense, talking about me and my Twitter. Otherwise, I would have gotten blocked right with you. Now, who is this guy? Tyler Kahar, right? Who is himself, by his own admission, implying that what they're doing as a group right now is intentionally antagonizing me to get blocked and therefore be able to flex. So by his own implication, it's his choice. So he's chosen not to be a dickhead with the others and get blocked by me because he wants to see what I tweet. Now, why is that relevant? Because it shows that they know that they're just fucking with someone else's mental health, by the way. And so in the next, what I'll show you is, look, who is he? He's the director and a people partner at Evil Geniuses. He's a people partner. in Evil Geniuses organisation. And what date was this all taking place, boys? 8th of September. Danny's last game was on the 4th of September, and the whole scandal around the emergency sub was in these subsequent days. That's why Evil Geniuses' low-level employees were trying to attack me, saying like people like me and others, because we asked it, what's going on with the sub? We're the ones who don't care about Danny's mental health. We're the ones who don't care, who are using him as some cynical commodity for clicks and clout and hits. We're the ones who should be attacked because we're saying outrageous things about mental health. Never said anything like that. You'll never find a tweet that even vaguely implies that. What I attacked was the idea that the coaching staff bragged. Remember when they won spring, they were like, how many games would we have won by with Jensen? Because they 3-0'd. And the implication is like, none more, because 3-0 is the best you can do. Well, I'll tell you what, homie, Jensen goes to Worlds, doesn't he? So that was my point. It's like, if you're going to flex that and take credit for that, well, then you have to sort of take some of the L when your player can't play, when he's burned out, when he's not capable of going to a world championship. Maybe he's way too young in his career. It's not the right sort of person to be competing in that particular way. Unlike legendary veterans like Jensen, Bjergsen, Doublelift, all the rest, Jizuke, all those guys that you know. So then consider that. If a people person, a director at EG, behaves days later, after a massive scandal in your own org, of someone mentally breaking down and being unable to play anymore in the playoffs, in theory going for a world championship, he can't even play anymore. The idea a people person is out there fucking with other people, antagonising them and trying to make them feel bad. You know what? I don't buy that this all cares about people's mental health, that they give a flying fuck about people, quite frankly. It seems like across the board in this org, it's all about money, results and clout. That's mainly what they seem to care about. So let's just go ahead and bring this back a second. This is an org that, based on the testimonies I've heard, it appears burned out their player by prioritising Worlds qualification and playoff run over his health. And when I say health, we're talking mental and physical. There was a subdued reaction when he won that last game, the last game he ever had to play for Evil Geniuses, and then he literally burst out crying despite having won the game, and in theory now never having to play again and being able to quietly retire and let his teammates go on. Why would he be bursting out crying? He didn't look like tears of happiness. I'll tell you that right now. I've seen tears of happiness many times. This looked like someone who was at his absolute end, and it's like you just hoped it was over a week ago, a day ago, fucking 2 months ago, and finally it's over. That's what those tears look like to me. And I'll just tell you right now, people are scared of this organisation, Evil Geniuses. They are scared that they are litigious and will sue you. They are scared that they will put out the bad info about you and the industry and lie about you and basically blame you for things that failed in the org and take all the credit themselves personally at the exec level. I've heard that people are afraid of how they isolate and get rid of people, especially staff. I've heard there was pressure put on players and coaching staff throughout the time that this particular management's been in place, that there were bad execs making shit decisions, and that has led to what sounds like a really disturbing set of outcomes for a young man who showed a lot of promise in his brief time in the LCS. I work hard to make sure I get mine, but no one can do it all on their own, and that's why everyone needs a support group. And so I have my Patreon community. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask a question in one of these monthly AMAs. Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are. Or maybe you want to take part in one of those long discussions where you can help set the table of the topics and join in with other like-minded people. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today via the Patreon link below, as the following people who I very much appreciate did: Matt Pugnatio, Rajcula, Ahmed Hadjou, Kyle, Bot Pounder 420, Torin, Animosity, Tobias Bernasconi, Jensen Goh, Tosh, and always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion.